I used to believe that losing everything meant you'd have nothing left to lose. I was wrong. When you strip away your career, your home, your reputation, when you take all of that and burn it down to ash, what remains is far more terrifying than emptiness. What remains is you, just you. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to face. My name's Daniel, and for 15 years I was someone people respected. I taught music at Lincoln High in Portland. I had students who went on to Juilliard, to Berkeley, to stages I'd only dreamed of when I was their age. Parents trusted me with their children's futures. My colleagues valued my opinion. I had a wife who believed in me, even when I stopped believing in myself. I had a life that made sense, a routine that felt like purpose. And then, in the span of one phone call, one terrible night, one moment of unforgivable absence, it all disappeared. The accident happened on a Tuesday. Claire was driving home from her sister's place. I was supposed to pick her up, but I'd gone to O'Malley's instead, telling myself I'd just have one drink to take the edge off a difficult day. 1 became 3, 3 became 5. By the time her sister called asking where I was, Claire had already decided to drive herself. The roads were wet, a truck ran a red light. She never saw it coming. I wasn't there. That's what I couldn't forgive. Not the drinking, though God knows I should have, but the absence. The choice I made to numb myself instead of being present for the person who'd been present for me through everything. They told me at the hospital that she didn't suffer, that it was instant. I nodded like that information mattered, like it changed anything. But standing there in that fluorescent hallway, smelling antiseptic and burnt coffee, I realized I'd been absent long before that night. I'd been slowly disappearing into bottles and excuses for months, maybe years. The drinking got worse after the funeral. Of course it did. I showed up to work with trembling hands and coffee-stained breath. I canceled lessons. I snapped at students who were only trying to learn. The principal called me into his office twice, offering support, suggesting counseling, giving me chances I didn't deserve. I wasted every single one. By November, I'd been asked to resign. By December, I'd sold our house because I couldn't stand walking past the couch where Claire used to read, the kitchen where she'd hum while cooking, the bedroom where her absence screamed louder than any sound I'd ever heard. I packed my truck with what fit: clothes, my old Martin guitar, a box of photographs I couldn't look at but couldn't throw away. I left Portland before dawn on a gray January morning, driving east with no real destination, just a desperate need to be somewhere I wasn't known, somewhere my failures hadn't already defined me. I ended up in Riverside, a town so small it barely appeared on maps, nestled between the Deschutes River and the Cascade foothills. Population maybe 800, one main street, 2 churches, a general store that doubled as the post office. The kind of place where people came to retire or hide. And I wasn't ready to retire. I rented a cabin on the edge of town for almost nothing because the owner, an elderly man named Walter, didn't ask questions and didn't run background checks. The cabin was small, drafty, and perfect. 1 room with a wood stove, a narrow bed, a table and chair, no television, spotty cell service, a porch that overlooked the river, where the water moved slow and constant, indifferent to everything human. I'd sit there for hours, watching the current carry branches and leaves and sometimes trash downstream, wondering if I was supposed to see some metaphor in it, some lesson about letting go. Mostly I just watched. The town left me alone, which was exactly what I thought I wanted. I'd walk to the general store once a week for supplies, keeping my head down, speaking only when spoken to. I'd nod at the same faces, the postal clerk, the man who sold me firewood, the kids riding bikes near the bridge. But I never offered my name or my story. I wanted to be no one. I wanted to fade into the landscape like morning mist over the river. For a while, I almost succeeded. But here's what I learned about running away. You can change the scenery, but you can't outrun the voice in your head. And that voice? It never shuts up. It replays every mistake. It catalogs every failure. It asks questions you can't answer. Like, how does someone who taught children to find beauty in music forget how to find it in himself? How does a man who once believed in second chances convince himself he doesn't deserve one? I didn't know, but I was about to find out. The silence in Riverside wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. Back in Portland, I had been surrounded by sound. Students practicing scales, traffic outside my classroom window, Claire's laughter filling our home. Here, there was only the river's murmur and the wind through pine trees. And somehow, that emptiness was louder than any symphony I had ever conducted. It pressed against my ears, filled my chest, made every breath feel deliberate and heavy. I'd wait before sunrise most days, not because I wanted to, but because sleep had become unreliable. I'd lie there in the dark, listening to the cabin settle, feeling the weight of too much time and too little purpose. Eventually, I'd give up, pull on jeans and a flannel jacket, and walk. The river trail became my routine, a path I could follow without thinking, without deciding anything. 5 miles downstream, then back, sometimes twice in a day. The first few weeks, I had passed other early risers, older folks walking dogs, a woman who jogged despite the cold, a man fly fishing from the same boulder every morning. We'd exchange nods, nothing more. That suited me fine. I wasn't looking for connection. I was looking for, I don't know, punishment, maybe? Or permission to disappear completely? The line between the two felt razor thin. My guitar stayed in its case, propped against the wall near the wood stove. I couldn't bring myself to open it. Every time I looked at that worn leather case, I remembered Claire asking me to play for her, remembered the last recital I'd organized at the school, remembered the kid, Marcus, whose name was Marcus, who'd come to me after class once and said, "Mr. Harrison, music is the only thing that makes sense to me." I'd told him I understood. I'd promised him that feeling would carry him through hard times. What a joke. What a goddamn lie. I started drinking again around week 3. Nothing dramatic, just a bottle of whiskey from the general store that I'd nursed through the evenings, sitting on the porch watching darkness swallow the river. I told myself it was different now, controlled, intentional, just enough to blur the edges. But I recognized the pattern, the familiar shape of justification taking form. I knew where this led. I just couldn't seem to care enough to stop. The town probably noticed, small places always do, but no one said anything. Maybe they'd seen it before. Broken people washing up in Riverside like driftwood, looking for a place to quietly fall apart. Maybe they understood that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them be. One morning in late February, I was on my usual walk when I noticed smoke coming from the bridge ahead. Not fire smoke, just cigarette smoke curling up from where someone was sitting on the railing, feet dangling over the water. As I got closer, I realized it was a kid, maybe 13, 14, wearing an oversized Blazers hoodie and headphones. He didn't notice me at first, too absorbed in whatever he was listening to. I thought about turning back, taking a different route. I didn't want to interact, didn't want to risk being recognized as someone who used to work with kids, who used to be trusted with young people's futures. But the path only went 2 ways, and retreating felt too obvious, too cowardly even for me. So I kept walking. He looked up when I was about 20 feet away. We made eye contact for a second, long enough for me to see something familiar in his expression. Not recognition, but that particular kind of loneliness that doesn't want company but desperately needs it. I knew that look. I'd been wearing it myself for weeks. "Morning," I said, keeping my voice neutral as I passed. "Hey," he replied, pulling one earbud out. I should have kept walking. I should have maintained the careful distance I had constructed between myself and everyone in this town. Instead, I paused. "You're up early?" He shrugged. "Can't sleep sometimes. Too quiet in my house." Too quiet. Yeah, I understood that. I know what you mean. He studied me for a moment,
sizing me up the way teenagers do, deciding if I was safe, if I was worth talking to, if I was just another adult who'd disappoint him eventually. "You live here?" "For now, the cabin past Miller's Orchard." "Cool." He nodded towards the mountains where dawn was starting to paint the peaks orange. "It's pretty here. Different from Portland." "You're from Portland?" "My mom and I moved here last year, after the divorce. She wanted somewhere quiet. I think she just wanted somewhere my dad wouldn't follow." I didn't know what to say to that. The silence stretched between us. Not quite comfortable, but not hostile either. Finally, I nodded towards the river. "Well, you found quiet." "Yeah." He half smiled. Maybe too much of it. I understood that too. But admitting it felt like admitting too much about myself, about why I was here, about what I was running from. So I just said, "Take care of yourself, kid," and started walking again. "Hey, mister." I turned back. "What's your name?" I hesitated. Names meant identity. Identity meant history. History meant explaining things I didn't want to explain. But he was just a kid on a bridge asking a simple question, and denying him that felt needlessly cruel. So I said, "Daniel," finally. "I'm Levi." He put his earbud back in, but I could tell he was still watching me. "See you around, Daniel." As I walked away, I felt something shift. Subtle. Barely perceptible, like a door I'd bolted shut getting nudged an inch open. It scared me more than the drinking, more than the silence, more than anything I'd felt since arriving in Riverside. Because I recognized what it was. It was the beginning of caring again. And I wasn't sure I could survive that. How do you let people in when you're still convinced you deserve to be alone?
Spring came to Riverside slowly, reluctantly, like it wasn't sure the town deserved renewal. The snow on the mountains receded to reveal gray rock and green patches. The river swelled with runoff, its voice changing from murmur to conversation. Wildflowers appeared along the trail, lupines and paintbrush, and something yellow I couldn't name. The world insisted on continuing, indifferent to whether I was ready. I kept walking. I kept drinking. I kept existing in that liminal space between giving up entirely and figuring out how to want something again. The routine held me together, barely. Wake up, walk, sit, watch the river, drink enough to sleep, repeat. It wasn't living, but it was sustainable, safe, predictable. Then I started seeing Levi more often. Not intentionally, Riverside was small enough that crossing paths was inevitable, but the encounters became a pattern. He'd be on the bridge, or walking near the trailhead, or sitting outside the general store with a notebook. We'd nod at each other. Sometimes we'd exchange a few words about the weather or the rising river. Nothing deep, nothing that required me to be more than a vague presence in his peripheral vision. But I noticed things. The way he always had headphones on. The way he'd hum to himself sometimes, tapping rhythms against his leg. The way he'd light up when a good song came on his playlist. I could tell from the way his whole posture changed, from closed to open, from guarded to briefly, beautifully undefended. He reminded me of my students, of Marcus especially, who'd once told me music was his only language. I tried not to think about that. I tried not to wonder what had happened to Marcus after I left, whether he'd found another teacher who understood, whether my absence had damaged him the way my absence had damaged Claire. The guilt sat heavy in my chest, right next to the whiskey and the regret. One afternoon in early April, I was at the general store buying supplies, bread, coffee, the usual bottle hidden in a paper bag, when Levi walked in with a woman I assumed was his mother. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe late 30s, with tired eyes and a careful smile. She glanced at me briefly, politely, the way locals did with newcomers they'd categorized as probably harmless but keeping distance just in case. Levi saw me and hesitated, clearly trying to decide whether to acknowledge me in front of his mother. I made the decision for him, nodding once and turning back to pay for my things, but I heard him anyway. "Mom, that's Daniel, the guy I told you about. The one from the bridge?" Her voice was warm but cautious. "Yeah, he's cool. Doesn't talk much, but in a good way." I felt her eyes on me, assessing. Parents have radar for danger, and I didn't blame her for scanning me for red flags. Middle-aged man, living alone, no obvious employment, friendly with her teenage son. I'd probably look suspicious too. I paid quickly and headed for the door, not wanting to make things awkward. "Mr. Daniel." I stopped. Levi had followed me outside. "Hey, random question." He shifted his weight, suddenly shy. "Do you know anything about guitars?" My chest tightened. "Why do you ask?" "He saw a case at your place once when I was walking past, and you just seem like, I don't know, someone who might know about music." I should have lied. I should have said, "No, I don't know anything. You're mistaken. Good luck. Goodbye." Instead, I heard myself say, "I used to teach music. A long time ago." His face transformed. "Seriously? That's awesome. Could you maybe... I've been trying to teach myself guitar from YouTube videos, but it's hard. And there's no one here who..." "No." The word came out harder than I intended. "Sorry, Levi. I don't teach anymore." The light in his eyes dimmed. "Oh. Okay. Yeah, I figured it was a long shot." He tried to smile, to play it off like it didn't matter, but I could see the disappointment. "No worries, man." He went back inside, and I walked home carrying my supplies and my guilt, both weighing about the same. That night I drank more than usual. I told myself it was because of the cold, because spring in Oregon is deceptive, all sunshine during the day and frost at night. But I knew the truth. I was drinking because Levi had asked me to do the one thing I used to be good at, the one thing that used to give me purpose, and I'd said no because I was terrified of failing again. The guitar case stayed closed, but now, every time I looked at it, I saw Levi's face, the hope, then the disappointment. I saw Marcus. I saw all the students I'd abandoned. I saw Claire, who'd believed I could be better than my worst decisions. A week passed, then another. I avoided the general store, changed my walking route, did everything I could to not run into Levi because facing him meant facing my own cowardice. It worked for about 10 days. Then, one evening, I was on my porch when I heard it. Guitar music, drifting across the river. Amateur, clumsy, but earnest. Someone was playing Knockin' on Heaven's Door, missing half the chords but pushing through anyway. The sound was painful and beautiful and so goddamn sincere it made my throat tight. I knew it was Levi. I knew he was out there somewhere across the water, teaching himself because no one else would. And I knew that if I kept hiding, if I kept saying no to everything that mattered, I'd prove every terrible thing I believed about myself. I sat there until the music stopped, until the sun set, until the whiskey bottle was empty and my hands were shaking, and I finally admitted what I'd been running from all along. I wasn't afraid to teach again. I was afraid that if I tried and failed, I'd have no excuses left. No story to tell myself about how I would have been fine if only circumstances had been different, if only I'd gotten another chance. Well, here was the chance. A kid with a guitar and hope and no one to guide him. The universe had sent me the most obvious opportunity imaginable, and I was sitting on my porch pretending I didn't see it. Claire would have been so disappointed in me. That hurt worse than anything else, worse than the loneliness, worse than the shame, worse than the river that kept flowing like time, like loss, like everything I couldn't stop or control. I looked at the guitar case. Then I looked at the empty bottle. Then I thought about Levi's face when I'd said no. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow, I'll decide. But even as I thought it, I knew I was lying. I'd already decided. I'd decided weeks ago, the first time I saw that kid on the bridge looking as lost as I felt. I just hadn't admitted it yet. How do you tell yourself the truth when you've been lying for so long? And what happens when you finally do?
I found Levi 2 days later at the park near the community center, a generous term for what was basically a swing set and a basketball hoop next to a small wooden building. He was sitting on a picnic table, his guitar across his lap, struggling with a bar chord. His fingers were in the wrong position, his wrist bent at an awkward angle. I watched him try and fail 6 times before I walked over. "You're too tense," I said. He looked up, surprised. "Daniel, hey!" "Your wrist. You're gripping too hard, trying to force it. That chord needs finesse, not strength." I gestured to the guitar. "May I?" He handed it over, a beat-up acoustic with worn frets and strings that desperately needed changing. But it had good bones, a decent sound. I positioned my fingers on the F chord he'd been fighting with and played it clean. See? It's all about the angle and where you apply pressure, not how much. I showed him again, slowly this time, talking through each finger placement. Then I handed the guitar back. "Try it." He positioned his hand carefully, mimicking what I'd shown him. It wasn't perfect, but it was closer. He strummed, and this time the chord rang out properly. His face lit up. "Holy shit! That's what it's supposed to sound like." "Language," I said automatically, then caught myself. I wasn't his teacher. I had no right to correct him. But he just grinned. "Sorry, I mean, holy cow." He played the chord again, then twice more, like he couldn't believe he'd actually gotten it. "How did you do that? I've been fighting with that chord for 2 weeks." "Practice, patience, and someone showing you the right technique. YouTube videos are good for learning songs, but they can't adjust to your specific problems. Everyone's hands are different." He nodded, then looked at me carefully. "So, does this mean you'll teach me?" And there it was, the question I'd been avoiding, the commitment I'd been running from. Every instinct screamed at me to say no again, to walk away, to protect myself from the inevitable moment when I'd screw this up too. But I looked at Levi's hopeful face, at his beat-up guitar, at the way he held it like it was precious, and I heard Claire's voice in my head. "Stop punishing yourself for being human," she told me once, years ago, after I'd missed a student recital because I'd been too hungover to function. "You made a mistake. Fix it. Be better, but stop acting like one bad day defines your entire life." I hadn't listened then. Maybe I could listen now. Once a week, 1 hour, and you have to practice between lessons, at least 30 minutes a day, even when it's frustrating. Especially when it's frustrating. "Are you serious?" His whole face opened up. "Serious, but I have conditions. First, you need to get new strings for this guitar. Can't teach properly with dead strings. Second, you do exactly what I tell you, even if it seems boring or pointless. I'm not here to teach you party tricks. I'm here to teach you music. There's a difference." "Deal, absolutely deal." He was nearly bouncing with excitement. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow, 3 o'clock at my place. And Levi," I waited until he met my eyes, "tell your mother where you're going. Give her my address. Tell her she's welcome to sit in on any lesson if she wants. I don't want there to be any confusion about what this is." He nodded, seriously, understanding the subtext. She'll be cool with it. She was a music major in college before life happened. She'll probably be excited. Life happened. Yeah, that was one way to describe it. After he left, I walked home slowly, my mind spinning. What had I just committed to? Teaching again meant responsibility.
It meant showing up, being present, staying sober enough to be useful. It meant risking failure, risking disappointment, his and mine. It meant caring about someone else's growth, someone else's future, when I barely managed to care about my own survival these past months. That night, I poured a drink out of habit, then stared at it for a long time before pouring it down the sink. If I was going to do this, if I was going to try to be someone worth Levi's trust, I needed to start now, not tomorrow, not after one more night. Now. The first 3 hours were hell. My hands shook, my head ached, every nerve in my body screamed for the numbing comfort of whiskey. But I made it through. I made coffee instead. I played guitar, tentatively at first, then with more confidence as my fingers remembered patterns they'd practiced for 30 years. The music sounded rusty, uncertain, but it was music, real music, not the silence I'd been drowning in for months. When Levi showed up the next afternoon, I was ready. Well, ready adjacent. I'd cleaned the cabin, made space for him to sit, tuned his guitar with the new strings he'd installed. He arrived exactly on time, nervous and eager in equal measure. "Okay," I said. "Lesson 1. We're starting with the absolute basics: proper posture, hand position, how to hold the guitar so you don't develop bad habits. It's going to feel tedious. Do it anyway." For the next hour, I taught, really taught, with all the focus and intention I'd once brought to my classroom. I corrected his grip, adjusted his posture, explained the why behind every instruction, and Levi soaked it up like he'd been thirsting for exactly this. Not just information, but attention, someone invested in his learning, his growth. When the lesson ended, he thanked me 3 times before leaving. As I watched him walk away, guitar case slung over his shoulder, I felt something I hadn't felt since Portland. Something dangerous and delicate and absolutely terrifying. Purpose. But I also felt the weight of it, the responsibility, the awareness that this kid was trusting me with something important, and I'd already proven I could destroy important things. What if I relapsed? What if I let him down the way I had let down Marcus, let down Claire, let down everyone who'd ever believed in me? I couldn't promise that wouldn't happen. I couldn't promise anything except that I'd try. And maybe, just maybe, trying was enough. At least for today. But what happens when trying isn't enough? And what do you do when the person you're most afraid of disappointing is yourself?
The lessons became the scaffolding that held my weeks together. Every Thursday at 3 o'clock, Levi showed up with his guitar and questions I hadn't anticipated. Not just about music, though those came constantly, his hunger to learn almost overwhelming, but about life, about my past, about what brought me to Riverside. I deflected at first, kept things professional, focused on technique, theory, the mechanics of making sound into something meaningful. But Levi was perceptive in the way quiet kids often are. He noticed the guitar books on my shelf, still labeled Lincoln High School Music Department. He noticed the photograph I'd forgotten to hide. Claire and me at Powell's bookstore, both of us laughing at something I couldn't remember anymore. "Was she your wife?" he asked one afternoon, nodding toward the photo. I'd been showing him finger-picking patterns, and his question made my hands still on the strings. "Yeah. She's pretty." He paused, then added carefully, "Was?" "She died 2 years ago." The words came out flat, factual. I'd learned that tone kept people from asking follow-up questions. But Levi wasn't most people. "I'm sorry," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made my chest tight. Then softer, "Is that why you're here?" "Part of it." I started playing again, a random progression, anything to have something to do with my hands. Teaching was the other part. I wasn't very good at either, being a husband or being a teacher, near the end.
so I left. I don't believe that. I looked up, startled. You don't believe what? That you weren't good at teaching? You're the best teacher I've ever had. He said it so matter-of-factly, so absolutely that I almost laughed. Levi, I'm the only guitar teacher you've ever had. Exactly. So I have nothing to compare you to, which means my opinion is totally objective. He grinned, then grew serious again. But really, the way you explain things, the way you care about whether I'm actually learning or just memorizing, that's not bad teaching. That's the opposite. I didn't know what to say. The compliment sat awkwardly in the space between us, too big for me to accept, too genuine to dismiss. So I did what I always did when conversations got too real. I changed the subject. Show me that G to C transition we worked on last week. He let me redirect, but I could tell he'd noticed I was uncomfortable with kindness, with being seen as competent, with the possibility that maybe I hadn't failed as completely as I believed. The lessons continued. Levi progressed faster than I'd expected, partially because he practiced religiously, but also because he had natural talent. His rhythm was solid, his ear for melody sharp. By the 6th week, we'd moved beyond basics into actual songs. He wanted to learn everything: classic rock, folk, blues, even some jazz chords that made his fingers cramp. Why do you love it so much? I asked him once during a water break. Music, I mean. He thought about it, absently plucking strings. It's the only thing that makes me feel like myself. Like at school, I'm the new kid. At home, I'm the reason my mom gave up her life in Portland. But when I'm playing guitar, I'm just me. Nothing complicated, no one disappointed. God, I understood that. The weight of other people's expectations, the exhaustion of constantly measuring yourself against who you're supposed to be. Music had been my escape too, once, before it became my job, before I'd turned it into one more thing to fail at. Your mom isn't disappointed in you? Maybe not, but she's disappointed in how things turned out. She doesn't say it, but I can tell. He kept playing, not looking at me. She wanted this whole different life. Professor job, house near the university, book club friends. Instead, she's managing the cafe in a town where nothing happens because my dad made everything in Portland too painful to stay. That's not your fault. I know, but it still feels like it sometimes. We sat with that for a while. The only sound his guitar and the river outside. I recognized his guilt, the irrational but persistent belief that somehow, if you'd been different, better, less yourself, maybe the people you loved wouldn't have suffered. That if you could just be perfect enough, you could save everyone. Levi, I said finally, you can't live your life trying to fix other people's unhappiness. Trust me on that. I tried for years with my wife, tried to be perfect, tried to never slip up or need anything. You know what it got me? Exhausted. And when I finally cracked, when the pressure became too much, I broke so badly I couldn't put myself back together. Is that what the drinking was about? He asked quietly. I froze. How did you... I smelled it on you, that first week I came here. And I've seen the empties you throw in the recycling. He said it without judgment, just observation. My uncle was an alcoholic. I know what it looks like. For a moment, I considered lying, denying it, maintaining the careful fiction that I was fine, that I had my shit together, that I was qualified to be his teacher. But sitting there with this kid who trusted me with his music, his time, his honesty, lying felt like the worst possible choice. Yeah, that's what the drinking was about. Trying to disappear. Trying to not feel how much I'd lost. I paused, then added, "I'm sober now. Have been since our first lesson, but I'd be lying if I said it was easy." "Does it get easier?" "I don't know yet. Ask me in a year." He nodded, accepting that. Then he picked up his guitar and said, "Want to hear the song I've been working on? It's that Tom Petty one you mentioned, Wildflowers." And just like that, we moved on. Not because the conversation wasn't important, but because sometimes the best response to pain is simply to keep going, to make music, to show up for the next moment and the next until you've built something that resembles a life again. Levi played Wildflowers, and it was beautiful, imperfect, still learning, but full of heart. And I sat there listening, thinking about how strange redemption is, how it doesn't announce itself with fanfare or certainty, how it arrives quietly in a cabin by a river, in a kid's earnest questions, in the choice to stay sober for one more hour, one more day. But I also felt the fragility of it, how easily I could slip, how much I was relying on this routine, this weekly lesson to keep me tethered. What would happen if something disrupted it? If Levi didn't need me anymore? If I failed him the way I'd failed everyone else? I didn't have answers. But for now, sitting there listening to him play, I decided that uncertainty was okay. That maybe you didn't need to know how the story ended to be willing to turn the page. Though some part of me wondered, what if the next page is the one where everything falls apart again?
If this story is touching you in any way, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us keep sharing stories like this. And if you'd like to buy us a coffee, visit ko-fi.com/bondsoffate.
Spring deepened into early summer and Riverside transformed. The pine forests went from gray-green to vivid emerald. The river dropped from its spring chaos to a steady, clear flow. Wildflowers carpeted every open space, lupin and columbine and Indian paintbrush, creating a palette I'd forgotten existed. The world insisted on beauty, and for the first time in months, I let myself notice. My routine expanded beyond just surviving. I started running errands without dread, struck up brief conversations at the general store, learned people's names. Walter, who owned my cabin, Maria, who ran the cafe where Levi's mother worked, even grumpy old Tom, who fly fished the same spot every dawn and had apparently decided I was acceptable enough to grunt at. But the real change was the music. I'd started playing again, not just for lessons, but for myself. Tentatively at first, just scales and exercises to rebuild calluses and muscle memory. Then songs I'd loved before everything went wrong. Dylan, Neil Young, Townes Van Zandt. The guitar felt like coming home to a house I'd abandoned, finding it dusty but intact. One evening, I was on my porch playing Tennessee Waltz when I noticed someone standing on the path. A woman about my age, slim with dark hair pulled back, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I stopped playing. "Can I help you?" "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. That was lovely." She stepped closer and I recognized her, Levi's mother from the general store. "I'm Sarah, Levi's mom. I wanted to introduce myself properly." "Daniel." I set the guitar aside, suddenly self-conscious. "Levi's mentioned you." "All good things, I hope." She smiled, but there was something assessing in her eyes, mother radar still active. "I wanted to thank you for teaching him. He talks about your lessons constantly. It's the happiest I've seen him since we moved here." "He's a good student. Natural talent." "Maybe, but talent only gets you so far without guidance." She glanced at the river, then back at me. "Can I be direct?" "Please." "When Levi first told me about you, about wanting to take guitar lessons from the quiet guy living in Walter's cabin, I was skeptical. Single man, living alone,
no visible job, willing to spend time with my teenage son. She held up a hand before I could respond. I know how that sounds, but I'm a single mother in a small town. I have to be careful. I understand. So, I asked around, talked to Walter, to Maria, to anyone who'd interacted with you. Know what I learned? That you're private, that you pay your rent on time, that you seem sad but harmless, and that you used to teach music in Portland. My stomach dropped. Did they tell you why I left?
No, and I didn't push. She met my eyes steadily. People come to Riverside for privacy. I respect that. I just needed to know you weren't dangerous. And after watching Levi these past weeks, seeing him excited about something, practicing without being nagged, actually happy, I needed to thank you. The knot in my chest loosened slightly. You're welcome. Though honestly, he doesn't need much teaching. He's got drive. That's more important than anything I can show him. Maybe. But drive without direction just means spinning wheels. She paused. Would you like to come to dinner sometime? Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and a chance for me to feed you something other than whatever bachelor food you're surviving on. I almost said no. Dinner meant conversation, questions, the risk of revealing too much about who I'd been and why I'd come here. But Sarah's invitation wasn't really about me. It was about Levi, about her wanting to understand the person teaching her son, about building the kind of community connection I'd been avoiding since I arrived. I'd like that, I said. Thursday, 6 o'clock? We're in the Blue House near the community center. I know the one. I'll be there. After she left, I sat on the porch feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. The pleasant anxiety of having plans, of being expected somewhere, of mattering to someone beyond myself. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Thursday came. I showed up at Sarah's house with wildflowers I'd picked along the river, feeling ridiculous and nervous like a teenager on a first date, which this wasn't, I reminded myself. This was dinner with a student's parent. Professional. Normal. Nothing to panic about. Levi answered the door grinning. You look terrified. I'm fine. You're definitely terrified. He stepped aside to let me in. Don't worry, my mom doesn't bite. Much. The house was small but warm, full of books and plants, and the kind of comfortable clutter that meant people actually lived there. Sarah emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, smiling when she saw the flowers. These are beautiful. You didn't have to. They were free and everywhere. I handed them over, feeling awkward and nervous like a teenager on a first date. Which this wasn't, I reminded myself. This was dinner with a student's parent. Professional. Normal. Nothing to panic about. Dinner was surprisingly easy. Sarah asked careful questions about my cabin, about how I was settling into Riverside, about my teaching background in general terms, without pushing for specifics. Levi told embarrassing stories about his attempts to learn guitar before I started teaching him. We talked about music, about books, about the town and its rhythms. At one point, Sarah mentioned she'd been a music major at Portland State. Piano performance, if you can believe it. Had dreams of concert halls and recording contracts. She laughed. Then reality happened. Student loans, a husband who wanted stability, a job market that didn't care about my degree, so I learned to make coffee instead. Do you still play? I asked. Not really. We had to sell my good piano during the divorce. Now I've got a keyboard in my room that I mess around on sometimes, but it's not the same. She said it lightly, but I heard the loss underneath. You should come by sometime. Bring the keyboard. Levi and I could use a pianist. We're getting too comfortable with just guitar. Her eyes lit up. Seriously? I don't want to intrude on your lessons. You wouldn't be intruding. Besides,
Levi needs to learn to play with other musicians. It's different than solo practice. Then yes, absolutely yes. After dinner, Sarah excused herself to take a phone call, leaving Levi and me in the living room. He pulled out his guitar immediately, eager to show me something he'd been working on. But before he started playing, he said quietly, "Thanks for this. For coming to dinner. For being nice to my mom." "I like your mom." "Yeah, but she doesn't really have friends here yet. She works all the time, and when she's not working, she's taking care of me. It's good for her to talk to adults who aren't asking for coffee orders." He strummed a chord. "Also, I think she's lonely, like the same way you are." His perceptiveness surprised me again. "I'm not lonely." "Dude, you live alone in a cabin and talk to yourself on the porch. I've heard you. You're definitely lonely." I laughed despite myself. Fair point. "And so is my mom, which is why I think you guys should be friends." He said it with the straightforward logic of teenagers who haven't yet learned to complicate relationships. You both could use more people. He was right, of course. I'd been so focused on surviving, on staying sober, on not screwing up his lessons, that I hadn't considered the possibility of actually building something here. Friendship, community, connection. But that night, walking home under stars so bright they hurt, I felt the weight of it. The responsibility of being someone people relied on. The risk of letting them down. I'd stayed sober for weeks now, but the desire still lived in me, quiet but persistent, waiting for moments of weakness. What if I slipped? What if Levi, Sarah started depending on me and I proved once again that I was unreliable? I thought about Claire, about how I'd promised her I'd quit drinking and then broken that promise more times than I could count. About how she'd loved me anyway, right up until the night my absence killed her. That was the thing about second chances. Someone had to be willing to give them, and the people who did, they deserved better than someone who kept making the same mistakes. But maybe that was the wrong way to think about it. Maybe redemption wasn't about being perfect. Maybe it was about showing up imperfectly again and again until the showing up mattered more than the stumbling. I didn't know. But standing there under those stars, I decided I'd keep trying to find out, even if trying scared me more than anything else I'd done since arriving in Riverside. Because what if the trying wasn't enough?
The first time Sarah joined our lessons, I was more nervous than I'd been in years. She arrived at my cabin with her keyboard, apologizing for the equipment's modest quality, for taking up space, for potentially disrupting what Levi and I had established. I reassured her, while internally panicking about whether I could actually teach two people, whether I remembered enough about piano to be useful, whether this was a terrible idea. It wasn't. Sarah played beautifully, rusty from years of neglect, but still skilled, still musical. And watching her and Levi play together, seeing them navigate a simple folk song I'd arranged for guitar and keyboard, I felt something I'd forgotten was possible. Joy. Not the desperate, seeking kind that chases away pain, but the quiet kind that sneaks up when you're focused on something larger than yourself. We started meeting twice a week. Thursdays for Levi's lesson, Saturdays for what became unofficial jam sessions, where we'd play whatever we felt like. Old standards, half-remembered songs from our separate pasts, occasionally something one of us had written. Sarah had compositions she'd abandoned in college, melodies she'd never finished. Levi had lyrics in his notebook, teenage poetry he was too embarrassed to share until we told him embarrassment was required for art. Riverside noticed. Small towns notice everything. People started commenting when I'd walk to the general store. Heard music coming from your place, or my daughter said she saw 3 of you playing on your porch. The attention made me uncomfortable, but it was gentle attention. Curious, not intrusive. Appreciative, not demanding.
One Saturday in late June, Maria from the cafe stopped me on Main Street. "Daniel, I've got a favor to ask." "Sure." "My daughter's birthday is next month. She's turning 8. I was wondering if maybe you and your music friends might play a few songs at her party. Nothing fancy, just background music. I'd pay you, of course." The request caught me off guard. "I don't know, Maria. We're not exactly—" "You don't have to decide now. Think about it." She smiled hopefully. "Emma loves music, and there aren't many chances for live music in Riverside. It would mean a lot to her." After she walked away, I stood there feeling that familiar panic. Performance meant stakes. It meant people expecting something, judging whether we were good enough, potentially being disappointed. All the things I'd been avoiding by staying small, staying private, staying safe. That evening, I mentioned Maria's request to Sarah and Levi. Sarah's response was immediate. "We should do it." "Sarah, why not? We're decent. It's not Carnegie Hall. It's a kid's birthday party." "Exactly. A kid. Kids are honest. They'll hate it if we're bad." "Then we'll practice until we're not bad." She played a bright chord progression on her keyboard, grinning. "Come on, Daniel. When's the last time you performed for people who actually wanted to hear you?" I couldn't remember. The last recital at Lincoln High was a disaster. I'd shown up late and barely functional, mumbled through my introduction, forgotten half the program notes. It was one of many reasons I'd been asked to resign. "I don't think it's a good idea." "Why not?" Levi asked. "Because I'll screw it up. Because I'm not ready. Because what if people see me play and remember who I used to be? Remember that I failed? Remember that I don't deserve to be standing in front of an audience making music when Claire is gone and Marcus is God knows where, and every student I abandon probably thinks I'm worthless?" But I didn't say any of that. I just said, "We're not that good yet." "Then we get better." Sarah's voice softened. "Daniel, I haven't played for anyone but you and Levi in almost 15 years. You know what that feels like? Suffocating. I forgot music could be shared, that it's meant to be shared. This could be good for all of us." Levi nodded. "Plus, it's for a little kid. Even if we suck, she'll probably just be excited there's cake." I wanted to say no. Every instinct screamed to protect myself, to avoid the risk. But sitting there with these two people who'd somehow become my friends, my community, my reason for staying sober, saying no felt like betraying more than just them. It felt like betraying the possibility that maybe I could be more than my worst day. "Okay," I said finally, "but we practice. A lot. I'm not showing up to a kid's party and disappointing her." They agreed, practically bouncing with excitement, and I tried to ignore the dread settling in my stomach. We had a month to prepare. A month to get good enough, tight enough, confident enough to stand in front of people and not collapse under the weight of expectation. That night, alone in my cabin, I pulled out the bottle I'd kept hidden under the sink. Emergency whiskey I'd told myself I'd thrown out but had secretly saved for moments exactly like this. I held it, feeling the weight, the promise of numbness, the familiar escape. Then I poured it down the sink. Again. Because if I was going to do this, if I was going to try to be the person Sarah and Levi believed I was, I couldn't do it halfway. I couldn't perform sober and then celebrate or mourn with whiskey. I had to commit, fully, terrifyingly. The next 4 weeks were intense. We practiced constantly, refining a set list of 10 songs, mostly upbeat folk and pop, nothing too complicated, everything designed to make an 8-year-old smile. Sarah was patient with Levi's mistakes, and Levi was enthusiastic about everything. I was the perfectionist, the one pushing for one more take, one more run-through. "Daniel, it's good enough," Sarah said finally, 2 days before the party. "It's not." "Yes, it is. You're being ridiculous." She played a gentle chord. "What's really going on? This isn't about the music." I didn't want to answer, but Sarah had this way of looking at you that made lying feel impossible. "I'm terrified of failing again." "Again?" "I failed at my job, at my marriage, at staying sober. at basically everything that mattered. This is the first thing I've tried to build since everything fell apart. If I screw this up too, you won't. You don't know that. No, I don't. But I know you've shown up every week for Levi. You've stayed sober. You've let me barge into your private life with my mediocre keyboard and forgotten dreams. You've already succeeded at the hard parts. Playing music at a kid's party, that's the easy part. He was wrong, of course. The music wasn't the easy part. The music was where failure became visible, where you couldn't hide behind good intentions or effort. But she believed what she was saying, and Levi believed it too, and maybe their belief was enough to borrow. "Okay," I said finally. "We're ready." She smiled. Finally. The night before the party, I barely slept. I kept running through the set list in my head, imagining everything that could go wrong. My fingers cramping, forgetting lyrics, freezing in front of the small crowd, everyone realizing I was a fraud, a failure, someone who'd lost the right to make music the night I let my wife die. But when morning came, I got up. I practiced one more time, and when Sarah and Levi arrived to pick me up, I carried my guitar to Sarah's car and tried to believe that maybe, just maybe, this would be okay. Though deep down, I wondered, what happens when you get the second chance you've been asking for and realize you're still terrified of wasting it?
Emma's birthday party was in Maria's backyard, a small space transformed with streamers, balloons, and a banner that read "Happy Birthday" in rainbow letters. Maybe 20 people total, kids running around with cake-fueled energy, parents chatting near the grill, grandparents watching from lawn chairs. Modest, low stakes, exactly what Sarah had promised. So why did I feel like I was about to perform at the Kennedy Center? We set up in the corner, Sarah's keyboard on a folding table, Levi and me with chairs and our guitars. People watched us with friendly curiosity as we arranged equipment, tuned, tested sound. No one seemed to expect much, which should have been comforting. Somehow it wasn't. "You okay?" Levi whispered. "Fine." "You look like you're gonna throw up." "I'm fine." Sarah leaned over. "If you need a minute, we can wait." "No, let's just play." Because waiting would only make it worse. Waiting would give my brain time to catalog every possible failure, every reason I shouldn't be here, every person I've disappointed before. Maria introduced us, local musicians who've been kind enough to play for Emma's special day, and we began. The first song was "You Are My Sunshine," simple and familiar. Levi started the guitar intro, Sarah added harmonies on keyboard, and then I sang, my voice rough from disuse but steady. The kids stopped running, the parents paused their conversations, everyone listened. We moved through the set list, "Lean on Me," "Here Comes the Sun," "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." Songs everyone knew, songs people could hum along to. Nothing innovative, nothing challenging, just honest, straightforward music played with as much care as we could manage. And something amazing happened. The tightness in my chest loosened, the fear subsided. I stopped thinking about failing and started thinking about the music, where Sarah would come in with her part, how Levi's rhythm complemented mine, the way certain chords created space for Emma's laughter to echo through the yard. We weren't perfect, we made mistakes, but nobody cared. They were just happy to have live music at a backyard party in a town where nothing much happened. Halfway through, I looked up and saw Emma dancing, awkward, unself-conscious, completely lost in the moment. Her joy was so pure it made my throat tight. When had I last felt that? When had music last been about joy rather than achievement, performance, proving something? We finished the last song, "What a Wonderful World," and people applauded, real applause, genuine appreciation, not polite obligation. Maria hugged us each. Emma asked Levi if she could touch his guitar, and several parents came over to say how much they'd enjoyed it. "You should do this more often," one man said. "We could use regular music at the cafe. Just Saturday afternoons, background stuff. Maria mentioned she'd love to have live music there." Before I could respond, Sarah jumped in. "We'd love to, right, Daniel?" I found myself nodding. "Sure, yeah,
We can do that." As we packed up equipment, I felt something shift inside me, subtle but unmistakable. That performance, simple as it was, had proven something I'd stopped believing, that I could show up for people without destroying everything, that music didn't have to be perfect to matter, that maybe I'd been wrong about being fundamentally broken beyond repair. "That was fun," Levi said on the drive home, grinning from the back seat. "It really was," Sarah agreed, glancing at me. "You did great, Daniel. I mean it." "We all did." "No, you did. I saw how scared you were at the beginning, but you pushed through. That takes courage." Courage? That wasn't a word I'd associated with myself in years, but maybe she was right. Maybe showing up despite fear was its own kind of strength. That night should have been peaceful, triumphant even. We'd succeeded. We had regular gigs lined up at the cafe. People in Riverside now knew me as someone who made music rather than just the sad guy in Walter's cabin. Everything was moving in the right direction. So why couldn't I sleep? Why did success feel heavier than failure? I sat on my porch until past midnight, not drinking. I'd passed liquor stores twice that week without even slowing down, a minor miracle, but unable to settle. The problem, I realized, was that I'd stopped believing I deserved good things. For months, I'd built an identity around being someone who had failed, who had destroyed what mattered most, and now people were telling me I was good at something again, that I had value, that I could contribute. It was disorienting, like learning to walk after a year bedridden. Every step felt uncertain, like I might collapse at any moment. 2 weeks later, everything fell apart. We were at the cafe, 15 minutes into our Saturday afternoon set. Good crowd, good energy. We'd just finished The Boxer and were transitioning into Fire and Rain when I noticed him, a man in his 40s, standing near the door, staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I knew him. Kevin Harmon, father of Marcus, my former student, the kid I'd abandoned when I left Lincoln High, the kid who'd once told me music was the only thing that made sense. My hands stopped moving. The song collapsed into silence. Sarah and Levi looked at me, confused. "Daniel?" Sarah prompted quietly, but I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Kevin was walking towards me, his expression hardening from recognition into something uglier, anger, betrayal. "You," he said when he reached our corner, "do you have any idea what you did to my son?" The cafe went silent, everyone watching, waiting. "Kevin, please, not here, not here. Where should I do this, Daniel? When should I confront the teacher who got drunk and destroyed my kid's senior year, who left without a goddamn word of explanation?" Every fear I'd been carrying crystallized into this moment, this public exposure, this reckoning I'd been running from since Portland. I stood up, hands shaking, trying to find words that wouldn't come. "Marcus barely graduated," Kevin continued, his anger raw and justified. "He fell apart after you left, stopped practicing, stopped caring. The one adult who'd connected with him just vanished, and he didn't understand why. Do you know what that did to him?" "I'm sorry," I managed. "Sorry? That's it? You ruined his final year, disappeared like a coward, and now you're here playing music at some cafe like nothing happened?" Sarah stood up. "Sir, I don't know what history you have with Daniel, but history? He was my son's teacher. He was supposed to be someone Marcus could trust. Instead, he showed up drunk, missed classes, and quit without a warning. That's the history." He wasn't wrong. That was the worst part. Every accusation was true. I had done those things. I had failed Marcus. I had been exactly the kind of teacher no kid deserved. "You're right," I said quietly. "I failed Marcus. I failed all my students. I'm sorry isn't enough, and I know that. But I am sorry. Every day." Kevin stared at me, his anger mixing with something that looked like exhausted disappointment. "You don't get to just move somewhere new and pretend you're fine. You don't get to teach music again like you didn't destroy it for my kid."
He left after that, but the damage was done. The cafe stayed quiet. Sarah and Levi looked at me with questions I couldn't answer, and I stood there feeling every bit as broken as I'd felt the day I packed my truck and left Portland. We didn't finish the set. We packed up in silence. Sarah drove me home without asking questions, probably sensing I couldn't handle them yet. When we pulled up to my cabin, she finally spoke. "Do you want to talk about it?" "No." "Do you think you're going to be okay?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. And because I was terrified that the answer was no, that I'd been fooling myself thinking I could build something new, that Kevin's anger had exposed the truth I'd been hiding from. Some failures are permanent, some damage can't be undone, and some people don't deserve second chances no matter how hard they try.
I didn't leave the cabin for 3 days. Didn't answer when Sarah knocked. Didn't respond to Levi's texts asking if I was okay. I just sat there, replaying Kevin's words, remembering Marcus's face, cataloging every student I'd failed and every promise I'd broken. The guilt was physical, a weight in my chest that made breathing difficult. On the 4th day, Sarah stopped knocking and just walked in. I was on the porch, staring at the river, not drunk, but not okay either. "We need to talk," she said. "I don't want to." "Too bad." She sat down beside me, not touching, but close enough that I couldn't ignore her presence. "What happened at the cafe? That man, what he said, is that all true?" "Yes." "So you did have a drinking problem. You did leave your teaching job under bad circumstances." "Yes." "Okay." She was quiet for a moment. "Now let me tell you what else I know. You've shown up for every lesson with Levi. You've been patient and kind and everything a teacher should be. You stayed sober, even when it was clearly killing you. You performed at Emma's party despite being terrified. You've tried, Daniel, really tried. Trying doesn't erase what I did. No, it doesn't, but it matters anyway." She shifted to face me. "You know why I came to Riverside. My ex-husband was violent. Not often, but enough that I lived in constant fear. The final time, Levi was home. He saw my father hit me, saw me bleeding on our kitchen floor. That image, that moment, I can't undo it. Levi will carry that forever." I looked at her, startled by the confession. "So I left, packed what we could carry and ran. Started over in a place where my ex couldn't find us. And for a year, I hated myself. Because what kind of mother lets her son witness that? What kind of mother doesn't leave sooner, doesn't protect better, doesn't see the warning signs? Sarah, I'm telling you this because I understand guilt, Daniel. The kind that sits in your chest and tells you you're irredeemable. But here's what I've learned. You can't let your worst day define your entire life. Yes, you failed that kid, Marcus. Yes, you let your drinking hurt people. But that's not all you are. You're also the person who taught my son guitar, who stayed sober when it would have been easier to give up, who played music at a little girl's birthday party even though you were terrified. Kevin was right, though. I don't deserve to just move on and pretend everything's fine. Moving on isn't pretending. It's accepting that you screwed up and choosing to do better anyway. She stood up. That man came here angry, and he had a right to be. But he doesn't get to decide if you're allowed to heal. Only you get to decide that. After she left, I sat with her words, rolled them around like stones, feeling their weight, testing if they were true. Part of me wanted to reject them, to insist that someone who'd caused as much damage as I had didn't deserve healing. But another part, quieter and more insistent, whispered that maybe Sarah was right, that maybe guilt without change was just self-indulgence, that maybe real atonement wasn't drowning in shame, but doing the hard work of being better. That afternoon, I did something I'd been avoiding for months. I opened my laptop, searched for Marcus Harmon, and found him. He had a website, basic, student-designed, but real. Marcus Harmon, guitarist. His bio mentioned community college, local gigs, a band he'd started with friends.
There were videos of him performing. He was good. Not Berkeley level yet, but talented, improving, still playing, despite everything. I watched every video, listened to every song, and by the end, I wasn't thinking about my failure. I was thinking about his persistence, how he'd kept going even after I'd abandoned him, how he'd found other teachers, other mentors, other ways forward. My absence, terrible as it was, hadn't destroyed him completely. I wrote Marcus a letter. Not an excuse, not a plea for forgiveness, just an apology, specific, honest, acknowledging exactly how I'd failed him and why it was wrong. I told him I was sorry, that he deserved better, that seeing him still playing music gave me hope, even if I had no right to it. I didn't know if he'd send it, but writing it felt necessary, like finally admitting in concrete words what I'd been running from. 2 days later, I showed up at Sarah's house for our scheduled lesson. Levi answered the door cautiously, like he wasn't sure I'd come, wasn't sure I was okay. "Hey," he said. "Hey, can I come in?" "Obviously." He stepped aside, then blurted, "That guy at the cafe was a dick." "Levi," Sarah's voice came from the kitchen. "What, he was? He publicly humiliated Daniel without even hearing his side." "I had a right to be angry," I said. "I failed his son. Everything he said was true." "Okay, but that doesn't mean he gets to scream at you in front of everyone." Levi grabbed his guitar. "Are you okay though, like actually okay?" I thought about it. "I'm working on it." "Good, because we have a gig next week and we're way better with you than without you." Sarah emerged from the kitchen, smiling slightly. "What Levi is trying to say, in his subtle teenage way, is that we missed you and we're glad you're back." I'm glad to be back. And I meant it. Despite everything, despite the guilt and fear and uncertainty, I meant it. We practiced that afternoon, played through our set list, made mistakes and laughed about them. And for a few hours, I let myself believe that maybe Sarah was right, that moving forward wasn't betrayal, that trying, even imperfectly, was enough. That night, I walked to the river with the letter to Marcus. Stood there holding it, feeling its weight, trying to decide. Finally, I pulled out my phone and searched for his email address, found it on his website, read the letter one more time, then typed it into an email and pressed send before I could second-guess myself. I didn't know if he'd respond, didn't know if an apology years too late would mean anything. But I'd done the one thing I could do, acknowledged the harm, expressed genuine remorse, and left space for him to decide what, if anything, it meant. Then I went home and played guitar until my fingers hurt. Played all the songs I'd loved before everything went wrong. Played because it was the only language I had for feelings too complicated for words. Played because it reminded me that beauty could still exist even after you'd broken important things. And when I finally put the guitar down and went to bed, I slept better than I had in months. Not because the guilt was gone. It wasn't. But because I'd stopped letting it be the only story I told myself about who I was. Though I still wondered, when does trying become enough? And how do you know if you've actually earned the peace you're starting to feel?
The summer festival in Riverside was modest by any standard. 3 bands, local food vendors, maybe 200 people gathered in the park by the river. Maria had convinced us to play the opening set, arguing that we were the town's official musicians now, which felt both ridiculous and surprisingly accurate. Sarah, Levi, and I set up on the small stage, tuning guitars and adjusting Sarah's keyboard while people trickled in with lawn chairs and blankets. I felt nervous, but it was different now. Not the paralyzing fear of the cafe performance, but the normal butterflies of wanting to do well, wanting the music to matter. "You good?" Sarah asked, adjusting her microphone. "Yeah, actually, yeah." Levi grinned. That almost sounded convincing. We played our set, a mix of covers and one original song Levi had written, tentative and teenage but genuine. The crowd was kind, applauding generously, singing along to familiar songs. Halfway through, I looked out and saw Walter in the front row, nodding along. Saw Maria with Emma on her shoulders. Saw faces I'd learned over these months. The postal clerk, the fly fishing man, even grumpy old Tom. I also saw someone I didn't expect. Kevin Harmon, standing at the back, arms crossed, watching. Our eyes met for a moment. He didn't smile, didn't wave, but he didn't leave either. Just stood there, listening. It wasn't forgiveness. I didn't deserve that. But it was something. Acknowledgement, maybe? Witness. After the set, people came up to congratulate us, to ask when we'd play again, to share their favorite songs from our set list. Levi fielded questions about his guitar, beaming with pride. Sarah laughed with Maria about something. And I stood there feeling the strangest sensation. Belonging. Later, as we packed up equipment, Kevin approached. I tensed, ready for another confrontation. "That was good," he said, simply. "Thank you. Marcus responded to your letter. Don't know if you saw." My heart lurched. "He did?" "He said..." Kevin paused, choosing words carefully. "He said he appreciated the apology, that it didn't fix anything, but it mattered anyway, that he's doing okay, and he hopes you are too." I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. I was angry at the cafe. Maybe I still am. But Marcus said something when I told him I'd confronted you. He said, "Dad, I survived worse than a bad teacher. Let it go." He almost smiled. "Kid's tougher than I give him credit for." He always was. Kevin nodded once, then walked away. And I stood there feeling something crack open inside me. Not breaking, but releasing. The guilt didn't disappear. It probably never would, but it shifted from a wall into something I could carry, something that didn't have to crush me. "Hey," Sarah touched my arm. "You okay?" "Yeah, I think I actually am." We drove home as the sun set over the mountains, painting everything gold and orange and impossible. Levi fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from performing. Sarah hummed along to the radio, and I watched Riverside pass by, this small town that had become, somehow, home. That night, I sat on my porch with my guitar, playing quietly, watching the river flow. The water moved like time, like loss, like everything you can't control. But it also moved like persistence, like continuity, like the knowledge that things keep going even when you think they can't. I thought about Claire, about how she'd wanted me to be happy, to find purpose, to forgive myself. I thought about Marcus, still playing music, still moving forward. I thought about Levi and Sarah and this unexpected community I'd found in hiding. I wasn't fixed. I probably never would be. Some things you break stay broken. But maybe that was okay. Maybe wholeness wasn't about being undamaged. Maybe it was about accepting the cracks and choosing to keep going anyway. I played Wildflowers, the song Levi had learned early on, the one about belonging and moving forward. The notes drifted across the water, mixing with cricket sounds and wind through pines. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Tomorrow, I'd wake up and teach Levi his next lesson. I'd practice with Sarah for our upcoming cafe gig. I'd walk to the river and maybe talk to old Tom about fly fishing. I'd stay sober because staying sober mattered, because people were counting on me, because I'd promised myself I would try. And that was enough. Not perfect, not redeemed in some grand cinematic way, just enough. I looked at the stars, the same stars that had shone over Portland, over Claire, over every version of myself I'd been and failed to be. They didn't care about my mistakes. They didn't judge. They just existed, constant and indifferent, and somehow comforting. "I'm trying," I said aloud, to Claire, to the universe, to myself. And somewhere in the darkness, I could almost hear her answer, "I know, that's all I ever wanted." The river kept flowing. The stars kept shining, and I kept playing,
because that's what you do when you're learning to be human again. You show up, you make music, you let yourself be seen. You forgive yourself, slowly and imperfectly, one day at a time. And that's maybe what redemption actually is. Not the absence of failure, but the courage to keep trying despite it.
If this story spoke to you, if you saw a part of yourself in it, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories, each one made with heart and honesty. Share this video with someone who might need it today. And if you'd like to support this project, you can buy us a coffee at ko-fi.com/bonds-of-fate. It's a small gesture that helps us keep creating stories filled with soul and truth.